that I found, one of the first, was right after World War II in 1946, when in a ceremony called the Festival of Recovery, 3,000 lanterns were released on a river near Tokyo. Tokyo at that time was still in ruins after World War II, and the Japanese launched the lanterns to honor those that they had lost and to commit to rising from the ashes. That ceremony was not aimed at any other country, but really at the Japanese themselves, to motivate them to not follow that path of destructiveness that led them to the devastation they saw before them. In a similar light, I'd like to dedicate at least part of tonight's ceremony to a sense of recovery aimed at those of us who live in America, to pay attention to our own history and to commit ourselves to not following the path of destructiveness that some of us see presenting itself to us. This year is the 75th anniversary of Executive Order 9066, a racially motivated and unconstitutional decree that in August of 1942 sent about 110,000 Americans of Japanese descent and their parents out of their homes and into concentration camps. The Japanese Americans that lived in those internment camps were subjected to brutal living conditions, loss of property, loss of their livelihood, and the loss of their rights as citizens of the United States. It was, as Tom Brokaw says, a shameful chapter in American history. Growing up, I never heard much about the camps. I always thought YMCA camps. But the camps that my parents went to were very different, and many of the people in my parents' generation simply didn't talk about it. They didn't tell us much about it. So when I studied World War II in my American history class in the 8th grade, and I didn't hear anything about the camps, I thought it pretty natural to go to my dad and say, was that stuff that my brothers told me really true? It was the only time I ever got swatted on the rump by my dad. Bam! He said, we need to go talk to your history teacher. And my dad, who was quiet most of the time and one of the mildest of men, got me in the car and we went over and had a very intense conversation with my 8th grade teacher. About a week later, my mom showed up and did this presentation where she talked about what had happened to them during World War II and ended it with, I think it's important that we do this conversation, or that I share this with you, because I don't want this to happen to anybody else. The story of the internment did not become part of California history books until 1991. After I finished college, I'm teaching middle school in Tucson, Arizona, and I'm trying to impress my parents who'd come to visit. So they're sitting in the back of the room, and this very polite kid says to my dad, "Mr. Hasegawa, is this your first time in Arizona?" And my dad replies, "First time by choice." This turned into this conversation in the back room, which completely disrupted the lesson I was trying to teach. And half the class was turned around the other direction. And then the bell rings, and this kid grabs my dad by the hand, and they go running off. And my mom and I are looking at each other going, what's going on? And in about 10 minutes, the principal's voice comes over the loudspeaker and says, for those of you that are interested, Mr. Hasegawa's father is going to talk about his experiences during World War II in the library, and if you want to bring your class, that's okay. And my mom and I were flabbergasted. This is a guy that hardly talked, and he didn't talk in front of people, so we didn't know what was going on. So we took my class and we went over there, and he sat there and he told us about how he felt when his family got rousted out of their house by soldiers and then sent off into the desert, and how seeing the conditions in which his family was going to live, he was so nauseous he couldn't stand. How he had to cross the desert because he was courting my mom, who was in a different camp, and so he'd go across the desert and he used to pray that the snakes and the scorpions and the bats and all those other things didn't eat him while he went to go pay court to my mom. And they got married, so it worked. And then he talked about after he left camp and went to Colorado, his parents are still in the camp. The Army drafted him and put him on a ship and sent him off to Europe to fight with the 442, the battalion of Japanese Americans, and how he was scared going across the ocean, and how he was seasick the whole way, and how he felt like, how can they do this to me now? Because they put us in camps because they didn't think we were American enough. But still, I don't want to, betray my country, so I'm going to go. He talked about how when all of this was over, he came back to a community where he'd grown up, and he was still viewed by some as the enemy. This political reality that we have today, where people seem it acceptable to openly insult and threaten other Americans who came from other countries. I think a lot of us are in a reality where you've been separated from other people, other Americans, because of your gender identity, or because of your religion, or because of your language, or because of your nationality. There's lots of people out there that are trying to separate us into different groups, to divide us. And we need to make sure that we don't stand silent as the same sorts of prejudices and discrimination that led to the internment of my family overtake America, leading to the shunning, vilification, registration, internment, and loss of rights that my parents suffered. We have to fight to not give in to the forces that are trying to divide us. Remember the words of Martin Luther King, who said, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Let us not be people who are silent in the face of injustice, but people who speak out consistently, insistently, purposefully, and peacefully in the name of peace." Thank you.